On this day, 1985, the critically trashed yet massively financially successful third sequel to the original Rocky, Rocky IV, opens in theaters.
Has the fight been set yet?
It's in Russia.
Are you nuts?
I must break you.
Rocky IV, rated PG. Starts Wednesday. Check newspapers for a theater near you.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to this hopefully happy hump day episode of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Wednesday, the greatest party night of the year because almost everyone is off tomorrow, this Wednesday evening here in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks the 39th anniversary of a film that I have to consider a guilty pleasure. It's one of those kinds of movies that was trashed by critics in its day, although it wasn't trashed as intensely as Sylvester Stallone's previous film, Rambo First Blood Part 2, which, if we're being honest, is a piece of shit. And his next film, which he made with the same director who did Rambo First Blood Part 2, George Pankosmatos. Sly's next film was Cobra, maybe the ultimate guilty pleasure movie. But Rocky IV, it's a guilty pleasure movie. The film is still ridiculous. It's totally absurd. And in the original theatrical version, the jingoistic elements, they're just beating you over the head. It's us against them. The height of the Cold War. All of that was really going on in the world. And man, Dolph Lundgren. You talk about an actor perfectly cast. Dolph Lundgren as Ivan Drago. It might not be Christopher Reeve as Kal-El, Clark Kent, Superman, or Clint Eastwood as Dirty Harry Callahan. But in terms of casting, right on the button, it's close. It's at least in the ballpark. So Rocky IV, which opened to a very lukewarm, frustrated critical reception, because Rocky III, despite the fact that it's very formulaic also, Rocky III got pretty good reviews. In fact, I think if you go to the Rotten Tomatoes, Rocky III did better than Rocky II. Rocky II is not that good. The first 15 minutes are great. The climactic fight is extraordinary. Everything in between, it's not that good. It just doesn't work for me. Rocky IV is super entertaining. And this is where I feel like critics kind of gave it a raw deal. So I'm telling you the movie is a guilty pleasure because I'm acknowledging it has countless elements that are ridiculous. Total ridicularity. But the film works. Even if it is, as the late, great Pulitzer Prize-winning film critic Roger Ebert said, it's a 90-minute music video, folks. This might be the first MTV movie. With the rapid cutting and the pounding soundtrack. James Brown, Living in America, just absolute gold. There are so many sequences in this movie, solid gold. But I remember when the first teasers or trailers for Rocky IV dropped. Spoiler alert, I was sitting at Wantor Jewish Center on a random Wednesday night. And this kid sitting next to me, was it Steven Schneider? Not sure. But he says, I saw the preview for Rocky IV, Apollo dies. Oh, I spoiled the movie for you. Actually, every trailer shows that Apollo dies. The whole film is based on Apollo being dead. It's not really a spoiler. That's like saying the movie Chinatown. Spoiler alert, it's set in Chinatown. Oh well, spoiled that one for you too. But I was surprised, just as a fan, as somebody who had seen the first three Rocky movies. Rocky III actually saw in theaters at the old Piqua Theater, Sunrise Highway across from the Massapequa train station. Big fan. I preferred Rocky III to Rocky II. And if I'm being honest, I prefer Rocky IV to Rocky II. Rocky II is a lot better than Rocky V, though. Rocky V was just, Sly kind of fucked up. Because his original approach, he stopped filming after 6 weeks because it was disastrous. And then the movie they ended up making, Tommy Morrison's not the problem. Great fighter. There's nothing wrong with him, nothing wrong with his performance. The actor who plays the Don King character, George Washington Duke, he's terrific. Talia Shire gives her best. And the movie just doesn't work. And Rocky Balboa, Creed series, all 3 movies, 3 stars out of 4 or better. So I didn't see Rocky IV until, sadly, it premiered on HBO, even though, yet again, everyone told me you have to see it. But as a child, growing up in the 1980s, I turned 12 when this movie was still in theaters, a month later. I had limited resources as far as how could I see a movie. For me to see Rocky IV, I needed a parent to take me to the movies. Well, my dad was always working, and it's not like Rocky IV was appointment cinema for him. If he had a little bit of time off, hey, Jared, why don't we go see Rocky IV? I don't even know how we ended up seeing Rocky III now that I'm thinking about it. I have no idea. Maybe mom pushed him into it. I have no clue. But didn't see it in theaters. Nobody rented it. It's not like at age 12 I was, I'm just going to go to the video store and rent a movie. I had to wait till it premiered on HBO. And not surprisingly, I loved it. Even though there were things I thought were weird back then, Paulie's the computer, the robot, all of that shit. The tease of the fight that climaxes Rocky III, the exhibition match between Apollo Creed and Rocky Balboa, which we don't find out who won. We see Rocky with a shiner, but Rocky always had a shiner. He was the kind of fighter that was going to bruise and cut easier than other fighters. Excuse me. There are certain fighters in history, and this is something that they worked into the original Rocky. Some guys just bruise and cut easier. And the man loosely based, or whose story, if you will, was loosely, it inspired Rocky, Chuck Wepner, the Bayonne Bleeder, was a guy, it would take a couple of shots and his eye is busted open already. When he fought Sonny Liston, that was actually, unfortunately, Liston's last fight before he died under very suspicious circumstances in 1970. He's bleeding all over the ring. He was bleeding all over Sonny, all over the ref. Did he really take that bad? No, he was just one of those guys. You corkscrewed him the right way, out comes Crimson. But Rocky IV, Stallone shot an unbelievable amount of footage. He directed it himself. This was something I did not realize at the time, but he directed the movie himself. And there was a version of The Matrix, as I like to say, where this was like a 2+ hour movie. And Slide decided to make it leaner and tighter and focus more on the kind of, I hate to say the vengeance angle because it's boxing. And bro, you should have stopped the fight. You ain't stopping this fight no matter what. You can only do, it's a brutal sport is what I'm saying. You can't take vengeance. The guy was doing his job. If they wave the fight over after the first round, Apollo doesn't die. Now, unfortunately, from Stallone's perspective, he wishes he could go back. I think I kind of made a mistake. We didn't really need to kill him, did we? No, you didn't. It works cinematically, though. And there is a sense of sadness that permeates the rest of the film because Apollo shouldn't have been out there, and there was no reason for him to die. It was completely unnecessary. Whether or not it's an exhibition, it's not really the point. We've seen in major fights where refs got criticized for stopping too soon, and then there were fights where the refs let it go on too long. And we go back to 1973, the iconic, legendary Sunshine Showdown, where George Foreman knocked Joe Frazier down 6 times. That fight should have been stopped after the first round. Again, the problem being when you have an iconic, legendary fighter, somebody like a Joe Frazier who was undefeated, he was a world heavyweight champion, Arthur McCanty didn't really want to stop that fight. He would have, I hate to say it, preferred that Joe had taken a 10 count. But as a lot of people, including Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali, have said, you weren't ever counting 10 over Joe Frazier. He was going to keep getting up. Even if his brain had checked out, he was unconscious. And that's what we got from Apollo Creed in Rocky IV. There was something in that champion. He was not going to just sit there as the ref told 10 because he was unconscious. Something was forcing his body to stand, even while his brain was temporarily incapacitated from all the shots he was taking. Rocky IV is almost a pure entertainment. There is zero character development. Our prior identification with Rocky Balboa is what we're left with. The son gets nothing. Paulie is comic relief, at least in the theatrical version. That's all. He's just there for laughs. And Talia Shire, who's really a kind of underutilized talent, if you ask me, there's nothing to Adrian in this movie. Nothing. At least not in the theatrical cut. We'll get to that. It is just as simple as Apollo makes a mistake. The nationalistic pride, this is us against them. Bro, that's great. You shouldn't be out there. Now, I don't really believe that Stallone was making a larger commentary on, unfortunately, the number of great fighters who carried on too long, from Joe Louis to Ali on down. People who should not have medically been cleared to fight. Now, that wouldn't be Louis, that would be Ali. But people who should not have been medically cleared to fight. Unfortunately, Apollo would have been medically cleared to fight. Because, ironically, the only bad beatings in his entire career that he took are the 2 fights against Rocky Balboa. We were led to believe that almost every other fight was a cakewalk until he met the Italian Stallion. The training sequences, the contrast, it's all, the idea was just to make us hate Russia. I got that when I was 11, 12 years old. They're the bad guys. Even though, if we're being fair, in the lead up to Apollo Creed versus Ivan Drago, in the immortal words of, I forgot who he was, "It is you who are the aggressor." It was Apollo Creed who was poking the bear. Drago just sits there, doesn't really say anything. Brigitte Nielsen has a few comments, doesn't really say anything. They're being honest. This was a great champion. His time has passed. He's kind of small. Even if he was at his best, Drago might beat him. This is where you get into size being, size does matter, all jokes aside, where this is a real thing. Even a 215-pound, dialed in at his peak Apollo Creed versus a 270-pound, it's not a great matchup. If you want to be honest, Rocky Balboa has no chance against this guy. It's through the magic of movies that Rocky, a weaker fighter than Apollo Creed, I would say even at this point, goes toe-to-toe with a guy who outweighs him by 70 or 80 pounds. Mike Spinks against Mike Tyson wasn't that big of a weight disparity. And yes, Tyson was a more talented fighter, but that's how these fights probably should go. If this were real, if this is prime Vladimir Klitschko taking on 190-pound Evander Holyfield, it's not really a good matchup for Evander. Evander needed to put more weight on. But that's really not what this movie is about. This is a movie about Rocky, I guess, overcoming his fear of death, trying to avenge his friend. It gets a little muddy. It's about us against them. And the idea, just from a conceptual standpoint, of Russian citizens and even members of the kind of almost high command starting to root for Rocky. I'm sorry. They're all dead. They're all going to get shot. But we don't get that movie. We get the movie where somehow Rocky becomes a folk hero during a fight, which is supposed to be a celebration of nationalistic pride for Russia, because their guy, Ivan Drago, already killed one American, maybe he'll kill another. It gets ridiculous when you really, as an older person, calculate how many different things are going on in this movie where you say, what the fuck? But Stallone didn't have to actually make that movie, because the film was always going to be, Apollo dies in every iteration of this. It was always going to be on some level of Rocky Balboa trying to even a score, but you can't. He's still gone. Whatever victory you might accrue, it's a very tempered victory, because your best friend, your brother in arms, Coda the Gladiator, he's already gone. there's no real win here. This is not Stallone in Victory 4 years earlier, where in that case there actually is a win. The win is we escape from this fucking hellhole. The Great Escape played out as a soccer movie, Victory. Another one of my all-time favorites, top 5 Stallone movies. The choreography, the fight choreography, though, it has to be said, is spectacular. It's as good in this film as in any of the... I would say it's actually, the choreography is sharper in this movie than in Rocky 3. It's about on par with Rocky 2, and certainly on par with Rocky 1. Rocky 1 is the best, though, because they seem to take more time with the final fight. And I feel like the makeup work in the first movie was better than in the others. And the way that Carl Weathers was able to kind of play, he was able to play what it would feel like if you have been hit in the side. And yeah, maybe you have a couple of busted ribs, but maybe you're bleeding internally. And Carl Weathers somehow managed to do that. I don't know what sort of research he did, but it works. In this movie, he doesn't, unfortunately, go far enough for that same level of commitment on the acting front. And he later joked about it. He said, you know what, when Apollo died, it actually jump-started my career because he got offered Predator and he even got the lead in Action Jackson, another guilty pleasure movie. And he would say, maybe I would have gotten with Arnold, maybe, but I got the lead in Action Jackson ultimately because of Rocky IV. Oh, and here's a little IP, here's a little trivia, and one franchise inadvertently kickstarting another franchise. After the $300+ million worldwide box office gross 39 fucking years ago, 300+ box office gross for Rocky IV, the drums were already beginning to beat. What could Sylvester Stallone do for Rocky V? And all throughout Hollywood and just among the regular fans, there was a joke that was being told that Rocky was going to have to fight an alien if they were going to make another movie because he had beaten the best fighter in history in Apollo Creed. He had beaten the Ernie Shavers on steroids in Clubber Lang. And now he had beaten the invulnerable, impregnable fighting machine who outweighed him by 80 pounds. In Rocky, we're going to have to fight an alien. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Two young writers, brothers, Jim and John Thomas, took that notion, that concept of Sylvester Stallone is going to have to fight an alien if they're going to make a Rocky V. They didn't make another Rocky movie. They said, what if Arnold Schwarzenegger is the one fighting an alien, but not in Rocky V? Something else. And that became Predator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger as Dutch Schaefer, his single toughest character. Dutch Schaefer is so badass. If he faced off against fucking Terminator, I'd still have my money on Dutch Schaefer. That is how much of a fucking boss Dutch Schaefer is in Predator. And his sidekick, there's a little bit of contentiousness, that famous handshake between the two guys. Al Dillon, played by Carl Weathers. What's the matter? The CIA got you pushing too many pencils? Yeah. Without Rocky IV, there is no Predator franchise. You can Google that one. I think it's great trivia. So Rocky IV, this enormous runaway box office success, and a film that has a humongous rewatchability factor. I can sit here and say there's all kinds of problems in the theatrical cut, which there are, but the film is still absolutely incredibly entertaining, and that is not something you take for granted. I saw that movie at least 15 times. I have seen it at least 15 times start to finish. You can always pick up anywhere in and just watch to completion. It is beautifully filmed, edited. Sly did a great job, no doubt about it. And he was still in his 30s at the time. And talk about a guy, a real whiz-bang. And people used to make fun of him because he spoke a little bit differently. Part of his face was paralyzed. I mean, come on. We have to be that much assholes? A lot of people were. And yes, it's fun to do the Stallone impersonation. But Sly he's a genius. He didn't luck into his career. It's not just that he had the right look. He's a terrific writer. And in the right role, he's a pretty effective film actor. So years and years and years later, they did Rocky V. Rocky V sucked. Rocky VI, or Rocky Balboa, came out 2006. I don't like it. The casting of Antonio Tarver, very inspired casting. Tarver's a character, Hall of Fame fighter. He beat Roy Jones Jr. twice, lost one, beat him twice. I didn't love Tarver as a fighter. I kind of thought he got lucky in that Roy Jones fight, that second fight. He just happened to land a home run bomb where he made a terrible mistake, bent over at the waist, which usually is curtains, and he just threw this kind of windmill punch. It was almost like a George Foreman anywhere punch. One shot. It was almost like the George Foreman over Michael Moore. It didn't really look like even a loaded shot, but he hit a guy just right. But Tarver is really good in Rocky Balboa. You wouldn't know that he was just, to me, you wouldn't know that he was just a boxer. He reads his lines like a trained actor. I thought he was terrific. I just don't like the movie. And as I say, the three Creed films, Stallone, big roles in the first one and second one. He got a Best Supporting Actor nomination. I wish that he would have won, but he didn't win. I don't think that Stallone was something that he thought about, but it wasn't something that he was actively going to pursue, recutting Rocky IV, going back to the editing room with all that footage. And I love that the studios keep the footage. They don't destroy the original negatives. There was a time in history where, as idiotic as it seems, it was standard practice. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of lost films, such as Greed, Eric von Stroheim's 1922 film, where there's about eight hours worth of missing footage. I'm not exaggerating. It's about 8 hours worth of missing footage. And most egregiously, Orson Welles' Magnificent Ambersons. But when COVID hit and the movie business, it slowed and then it shut down. Stallone didn't panic. He wasn't angry, at least from what we could get, but he started doing stories to his Instagram. The thing with Stallone, you wouldn't necessarily expect that he would be so expansive and so interactive with his fans. And he's got tens of millions of them. But he is, and he was during this time. So he started doing stories where he said, yeah, the movie business has slowed down. People are asking, how am I feeling? How's the family? We're all good. Just going over the bases because people get concerned. He said, I'm going to take this time and I'm going to go back and we're going to find some of the original negatives and some of the unused footage for Rocky IV. And I'm going to see if there's anything that I can do here. I don't have anything better to do. Sorry to say. And Stallone is legendarily restless. This is very important to note. He can't sit still. The Netflix documentary called Sly, it's good, it's not great. The Arnold documentary is better because it's 3 times longer and Arnold is willing to let people take shots at him. It's warts and all, especially in the final third where Arnold just, almost is inviting, I fucked up repeatedly, I get it, I can take it. Stallone didn't want that kind of documentary, but what you get from the Sly documentary is he can't sit still. So when COVID happened, he had to keep himself occupied. He went back, he assembled film cans, and he had his editors, and they figured out ways to get it done, and he produced an entirely different cut, now known as Rocky IV, Rocky versus Drago, and he would call this his director's cut. He toned down the us versus them elements. I know it seems crazy. He toned it down. He made a deeper, more personal story. There is more with Rocky and Adrian. Talia Shire gets to do some acting, and even Sly gets to do more acting. There's more to Apollo Creed, Code of the Gladiators, and he actually has a better send-off, despite the fact that the fight ends the same way. Sly, for whatever reason, took a couple of minutes out where Apollo is almost giving as good as he's getting, and I feel like that was a mistake, but he put it back into the film. And you actually get a little bit more of Ivan Drago and his thinking, a little bit more character. There was a lot of great unused footage. And the incredible thing about Rocky versus Drago, Stallone's director's cut, is it's about the same length as the theatrical version, which as we all know and love. But it feels like a different movie. Even though the film it's the same basic story, but there's so much different footage and new footage, different angles, different musical cues. It feels like you're watching good old Rocky IV, but you're watching it somehow again for the first time. And all props to Sylvester Stallone for doing it. He must have spent 200-300 hours on this, maybe more. He kept updating fans. And, he was working with kind of a skeleton crew. There weren't that many people around. And he kept screening little bits and pieces, and he would share some of it. He didn't want to give it all away, but share some of it. He's like, now I'm going over the scene at the end where I'm staring down with Dolph, and we had a couple of and he's doing all of this stuff, but he left no stone unturned. He busted his ass. Guy was already 74, 73 going on 74. He could have just taken a break like a lot of other people. No. What means that word? That is always his process. Keep moving forward. Or as he says, keep punching. Don't stop nothing. And whatever people might say about Rocky IV in either version, because I rate them both. If I'm giving a score, they're both 7.5 to 8 out of 10. I don't prefer one or the other. Rocky versus Drago gets rid of Paulie's robot. That's the best thing it does, because that was absolutely idiotic. No more robot. Great. And more character. More sense of the marriage being tested. Because Adrian doesn't want her husband to die. It's a terrific film to me. Yes, it's a guilty pleasure, but it is a terrific film, whether you watch the theatrical cut. And both versions, I know that Rocky vs. Drago was streaming free on Max. I don't know if it still is, but both are available for rent for a couple of bucks on Apple Plus and Amazon Prime. Both versions are worth seeing. And certainly if you've watched the theatrical cut 15 times and you've yet to see the director's cut, you have to see it. Must see. You will not be disappointed. You might even say, I don't know why Sly didn't just make a 2-hour and 15-minute movie in the first place, because the pieces were there for a longer film. And I think that audiences would have shown up for it. But on the other hand, you say $300 million plus box office gross, a lot of it overseas. And why? In the immortal words of the late, great New York University film professor Robert Sklar, in Europe, they line up around the block for Stallone. And in the right role, they always will. Rocky IV, the theatrical cut, released on this day, 1985, directed by Sylvester Stallone and starring Sylvester Stallone, Carl Weathers, Talia Shire, Brigitte Nielsen, Dolph Lundgren, Tony Burton, and in a smaller role this time as Paulie, the late, great Burt Young. This has been episode 369 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your night before Thanksgiving with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.